This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your fridge with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hey, I'm back. This is some actual, fresh, straight off the press content. For season 4, I've been re-releasing some old eppies while I get my shit together. This one was recorded in the wild on the Labia Lounge, so as is usually the case in those settings, the sound quality isn't perfect, so bear with us, but this is a really incredible chat with my friend Hannah, who has been diagnosed in the last couple of years with autism and ADHD and has gone on a whole journey with this. Starting to understand more and more how her brain works and how best to work with her brain. We tie it in with pleasure, sex, intimacy, relating, and give some really practical tips and learnings around how maybe to experiment and navigate those waters when you've got some neurospicy stuff going on. And this is sort of a follow-up episode from an epic Tub Talks one we did a month or two ago. You can go back to listen to that one. It's just Tub Talks Neurodivergence, where we speak about a lot of stuff that we don't cover in this episode. So if you really want to do your homework and get the full experience, super comprehensive rundown, then listen to that one as well, but it's not required. There's still so much juice in this episode. And yeah, I've learned so much through being friends with Hannah and having a lot of neurodiversity in my social circles and with the clients that I work with, and it's just so enriching and fascinating. The more I learn and the more I'm exposed to all different ways of thinking and functioning. So I would really encourage you to give it a whirl, start reflecting on whether some of this is relatable to you, whether that's, with regards to your neurotype or someone close to you, and start looking at the world and all of your interactions with people through a new lens that's informed by a deeper understanding of the diverse ways that our brains can work and see the world and experience the world. That's all I've got to say on that for now, but without sounding too preachy. But yeah, enjoy.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, this is going to be a freaking whopper of an episode, I think. But last time we had a very informal chat in our Tub Talks installment. We talked a little bit about your experience with neurodivergence, and there was a bunch of thoughts we both had after that chat where we were like, oh, we didn't talk about this, or we didn't cover that, or like, what about this? So wanted to do a follow-up and just sort of rehash and like do a bit more of a comprehensive job of it. And also kind of tie it back to your experience and, you know, people with neurodivergence experiences with like sex and intimacy and pleasure and libido and relationships and stuff like that. So how we're going to structure it, and apologies everyone, I sound so flat and it's because I am. I'm like dying with exhaustion, which is annoying because we've set up the Labia Lounge like in Eddy Gardens in Melbourne. It's a sunny arvo, it's a Saturday, it's beautiful, but I just can't be bothered talking to anyone. So even though we came to kind of, you know, maybe get some little interviews and chat with picnic goers, I've been feeling so introverted and flat and like antisocial that I've been actively trying to repel people so that I don't have to talk to anyone, except you, of course, Hannah. But we're going to give this chat a crack anyway. It might get interrupted, but we're going to roll with it. So the way we're going to structure this is kind of reeling off. We'll start with autism, and then might be a part 2 where we talk about ADHD. But yeah, the way we're going to structure it is reeling off some of the like diagnoses criteria, like diagnostic criteria, and then chat about how it relates to, you know, your actual lived experience, and also tie it back to how it's been, you know, getting these diagnoses and then learning more about how to work with them and work with your brain. And how this has affected your sex life and your relationships, and how you've turned it into a bit of a gift. Like, I guess these things they pose a challenge. They pose a lot of challenges in relationship, in sex, in terms of embodiment and pleasure, but you have kind of gone on a bit of a journey with it and turned it into a bit of a gift. And so I really want to like pick your brains about that, and then maybe, you know, help some other people navigate it better because of some of the tips that they'll glean from listening to how you have, you know, figured yourself out.
Cool.
So, welcome, Hannah.
Thank you.
Definitely at this point have been on the potty more than anyone else, I think.
Hell yeah.
And I suppose like launching right into it, the first sort of diagnostic criteria is deficits in social emotional reciprocity, ranging, for example, from abnormal social approach and failure of normal back and forth conversation, to reduced sharing of interests, emotions, or affect, to failure to initiate or respond to social interactions. How does that relate to your experience?
Okay, can I pause here and say something?
Do it.
I want to go back. Okay, so to understand this, I think that we need to go back and break it down a little bit more. If you are autistic, the kind of things that you experience are divided into 2 categories. And because a lot of people really suffer and struggle in their lives as a consequence of these things, the diagnostic manual for diagnosing this frames it as like a deficit. And if you are neurodivergent, you might find that frustrating because it kind of sucks to feel like you get labeled as having a deficit when it sometimes feels like you're just different, and because the rest of the world is moving at a different pace to you, then you know, by consequence, get labeled as having a deficit rather than a difference, you know what I mean?
Dude, I'd literally written down in my notes, how does it feel that a lot of these, the first word is deficit?
Yeah, totally. So as we read these out, I just wanted to flag that at the start, that they all start with deficit. And the language that I've been hearing around this more recently is to say difference rather than deficit, because it is just like a difference. Like in the previous episode, we were talking about speaking a different language, and that's really what it is. But, you know, if you're speaking a different language to everyone else, then it will look like you have a deficit. And let's just also flag at the start of this by saying that only 1% of people are autistic. So if you're speaking a different language to 99% of the population, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Everyone else is going to see it as a deficit.
Everyone's going to see it as a deficit. So this is related, this is, labeled as a deficit, but I think as I explain it, it's helpful to think about it as a difference because especially, I was really resistant to getting diagnosed with autism because I was like, I'm fine. I'm not deficient. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. And back to what I was kind of saying at the start about the two different main categories of things that you might experience. The first one is persistent deficits or differences, as I'm going to call it, in social communication and social interaction. So the one that Freya, you kind of opened with, that falls into this category. And I guess that's the one that let's talk about that first. So differences in social interaction. Okay, so the first one is social emotional reciprocity, which is an interesting one because I think what this calls to mind, and let's just start with the stereotype, is an autistic person who doesn't have any empathy, doesn't care about any other people. You can think about like sociopaths or psychopaths who don't really experience emotions in the same way to others, and so they're kind of inured to other people's, pain and other experiences. And when you have that level of separation between you and humanity, a lot of people do a lot of, really bad things. But that's not really always what it looks like. And this is one. That's the extreme end of the spectrum. Absolutely, absolutely. At a sort of more mild level, the way that this kind of manifests for me in terms of like social emotional reciprocity is that I always feel like I've had to deconstruct relationships in this like really intellectual way to understand what's going on and what the purpose of them is and what the other person wants from me and like what's happening here, if that makes sense. And it's not so much like from a social anxiety perspective, because I know that there are a lot of people out there who have social anxiety and they worry, does this person like me? And this is quite different from that in that there's not this inherent understanding of what should be contained within a social interaction. And so you're having to do all these equations in your head to work out what should happen next. And if you don't do your equations fast enough, you end up seeming really awkward or not saying the right thing or kind of ending up, with an obvious
and like
something going wrong.
When you say like you're doing these equations, what does that look like? Is that like, okay, so this person has come up, they're smiling at me, their body language is looking open and they've asked me a question and I've responded, and now that is my cue to therefore do this next thing. Like, is that what you mean?
Honestly, a little bit like that. And I guess because, your internal monologue doesn't necessarily always sound like word for word like that, but more or less, it is like everything is a calculation and you're really carefully like studying the social situation that you're in for all the pieces of evidence about how the other person's feeling. And if you're high masking as well, which some people are, some people aren't high masking, and those might be the people that you can tell from the outset that their body language or their tone of voice is off. But if you are high masking, you're also doing the same on yourself. Like, oh, okay, my shoulder is a little bit too far forward, so I'm just going to kind of shuffle that back and sit up a little bit taller so that I look relaxed. And you're thinking that all of that at the same time as you're trying to talk to someone. So it adds this whole extra layer of work that you have to do. And it kind of blew my mind when I kind of realized that other people weren't doing this, because I was like, how are you doing anything then? So anyways, so it
just doesn't sort of become organic and natural ever. It's just you learn more. You collect data and you learn more. How to respond in social settings and how to hold your body and things like that. And then, but it still always requires thought and energy and doing the math
to make sure you're responding appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, if you've done it a lot of times before, you get good at it. And I guess one way that you can kind of think about it is like socializing or presenting yourself to the external world as a performance. And if you have done the performance a lot of times, you know it really well, you know how to do it. So it's not like, it's not like you have to figure it out new each time, but it still does feel like a performance rather than just a way that you naturally are. And I think what's challenging about this is if you are in a relationship, it's hard to snap out of that mode of like constant analysis and performance to actually enter like a meaningful relationship with someone. And if we kind of scroll back and think about, maybe like the more intimate context of like sex or even, just, kissing someone. If you are constantly performing, then those things are not these sort of vulnerable moments because they are performances. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like, is it possible for you to drop, because obviously this is something you've at first learned to do without even realizing that, like, you've learned a lot more about this through getting diagnosed and reading up, but like it's become such a like kind of chronic thing that you do constantly because that's what the world expects of you and that's how you've learned to survive. How difficult or easy is it to drop that mask and to drop the performance and like actually be present in a moment with someone and maybe like have a make out or like, yeah, because it just sounds unbelievably exhausting to be masking all the time, but then also sounds like it would be quite difficult given that you've had so much practice masking and probably not heaps of practice being totally unmasked. How do you go with that?
Well, I mean, it is really challenging, and that's one of the reasons that I just like realized that I needed to work on all of this sex and relationship stuff is because I like pretty much couldn't do it. I really enjoyed sex and I really enjoyed like intimacy and intimate relationships, but it kind of felt more like at the end of the experience, I would kind of assess like, okay, how convincing was that? How good was that? And the thing is, like, if you're viewing it as a performance and you're doing like performance reviews on yourself at the end of these things, you become very convincing. And I feel like, my partners would have had a great time because it like seems great, looks great. And this is something that not just neurodivergent people do, but everyone kind of fakes it to a certain extent at some point. Well, I mean, lots of people do at some point in their kind of intimate relationships. But I feel like, if you have that intensity of social intellectualization and anxiety and masking, then sex is like a whole other challenge,
Fucking
really.
hell, dude.
And I think the thing that has kind of helped, is if you have a partner that you feel like you don't have to do that in front of. So that really, really helps. Like my partner at the moment, I don't feel like I have to do this whole performance thing in front of him. We have our own world that we kind of live in, and we don't expect each other to be upheld to these like social norms, which is nice. And that applies to anyone. If you have someone that you feel comfortable with, then it does help a lot with that. And it is funny, actually, if I look back through my list of boyfriends, because people always used to remark like, "Whoa, Hannah, you don't have a type. These guys, they all look completely different. They're all into completely different things." And if I look at all of them, I'm like, oh, all of them were autistic.
Yeah.
Because I was gravitating towards people who I didn't have to do that in front of.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I really want to ask how it is to be in a relationship with another autistic person and where that actually makes it easier and then where it makes it harder. But we don't have to get to that right now if you want to finish off this point.
Yeah, well, I think maybe relating to this point, if you think about having like a difference in social emotional reciprocity, if you are neurodivergent and you are in a relationship with someone who's neurodivergent, your expectations are kind of the same. I've seen a lot of relationships where maybe one of the partners is autistic and one of the partners is not. And I think that it can create these expectations that like the autistic partner can just never meet because they're just never able to be what the other person needs them to be, which is hard for both, because one has an overwhelming sense of failure and the other one has an overwhelming sense of not being supported.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's how it is in every relationship, but I'm saying that it really helps when you know how your partner's brain works, because you can adjust your expectations a little bit. Like, for example, when my husband and I are in separate places, like right now I'm in Melbourne and he's in Sydney for work, we'll like send each other messages, but really I think compared to a lot of other couples, we don't really talk when we're apart. And it used to kind of like give me anxiety, because I'd be like, whoa, apparently this guy loves me, and then suddenly I leave the room and he like forgets I exist and he doesn't reply to my messages. Like I sent him this really cute, like good night message, like really thoughtful message, cute picture, something like that. He just like doesn't reply to it for a few days. And I feel like if you think about the norms in terms of social emotional reciprocity in that situation, you'd be like, whoa, my husband's pissed, I did something wrong, or,
What a cunt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I know that when I see him, we'll just be straight back in our worlds.
Yeah, you just have an understanding. And I guess every couple has like a varying...
Exactly.
Kind of... varying like levels of kind of expectation around that sort of thing, but it's super interesting because I would say the social norm is being in a little bit more contact and being a bit more responsive, but it's kind of cool that you don't even have to worry about that or overthink it, because it doesn't mean anything if he doesn't.
Exactly, that's what it is. It's that it doesn't mean anything, which is hard to get your head around. And that's the thing is, learning these things about how your brain works. And, even if you know someone who is neurodivergent, if something happens where you feel like, like the story I've just described, where you feel like, ooh, like emotionally something happened that was unexpected, or you feel like you were offended or let down, it's interesting to try to think like, what's the other person thinking? Because something I've been thinking from this example when my husband and I are apart is he's just taking a break from socializing altogether, and that's really good for him to be able to take those breaks.
Definitely.
And I just have to remember that like he will still love me when I get back.
Yeah. Totally. And I think that's like quite healthy and good for a relationship, and like having that trust and stability so that you don't have to be in constant contact is like really, couples goals.
Yeah. Totally. Okay, should we do the next one? Should we move on?
Yeah. What's the next one?
Next one is differences in nonverbal communication. So that could be... Oh, and also differences in verbal and nonverbal communication. So it's like the whole communication thing all put together.
Yeah.
So, I mean, verbal communication, some things there could be, like the volume that you talk at. This might be a really obvious one for people. If you've ever met someone who is obviously autistic, often those people talk really loud in this kind of like really flat, broad, monotone tone of voice. And it's quite like... It's quite like, I don't know, it's quite strange to come across that, and I feel like it often feels like you almost don't know what to make of it. On a lesser scale, autistic people can often come across as being really blunt or rude when they're not trying to be rude. And this is also something that has helped me a lot in my relationship, and also helping people understand me, is that if you're talking to an autistic person and it sounds like they're being blunt and rude, often it helps more to listen to the words rather than the way the words are delivered. Like when I was a teenager, my dad used to always get angry at me for my tone of voice. And I'd always be like, what tone of voice? Like, I don't have a tone. This is just my voice. But now, when I talk to other autistic people, I'm like, oh, I get it. Like going back to my partner, sometimes he'll say something and I'll be like, whoa, he hates me just by his tone of voice. And then I listen a little closer to the words and I'm like, oh no, he's just talking. Like he's not thinking about how it's being delivered. And it kind of brings you back to the point that if you are paying attention and you are delivering your lines and you're performing, then it'll sound great. And if you're kind of tired and you're not paying so much attention, you might sound like a blunt, rude bitch, I
think I do that a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's because I'm a bit autistic or whether that's just me being a bit tired or antisocial. But I have had that you know, in relationships where people get really butthurt about my tone of voice, and I'm completely oblivious until they point it out.
Yeah.
And say that that was kind of hurtful, and I'm like, oh, because it wasn't intended, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Tone of voice. Eye contact is another obvious one that I feel like is very trendy on social media. People talking about how eye contact is weird. And, you know, I used to see things like that and be like, oh, I'm not autistic, I can do eye contact. But then I realized that to do eye contact, I have to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because it's another one that I don't understand how people do. Like, I feel like I'm constantly thinking about how much time I'm spending looking at someone's eyes and then going, oh, okay, now I've looked too much. Now I have to just take a break and just randomly look to the kind of middle distance off to the right for 3 seconds and then look back. That can be another one. I honestly feel like my comfortable place when I'm having a really good conversation and I'm feeling super relaxed is I don't look at the other person at all. And it's great if I'm sitting outside and I can just stare at a tree and have like an hour-long conversation without having to look at someone's eyes. It's so nice.
Yeah.
So
wow.
easy. So easy.
I like looking at people when they're talking,
Yeah.
but as soon as I'm talking, I can't maintain the eye contact for long. I do need it. Otherwise maybe I can't concentrate on what I'm saying as much. So I'll often just stare off into the distance while I speak or like look around the room or whatever. And I have been noticing that more about myself recently because I'm like, oh, maybe I thought I was all G with eye contact. But actually, you know, you never know what it's like being on the receiving end of like your own kind of demeanor and eye contact. And yeah, I talk a lot, like, for my job, so I kind of wouldn't mind trying to practice making more eye contact when I'm speaking. But when I go on a bit of a tangent, or I'm telling a story, or I'm explaining something, like, it does just help me, you know, be present with what I'm saying and get the words out how I want them to come out if I'm not also distracted by, like, looking someone in the eye.
Yeah.
And I didn't even notice that about myself until pretty recently.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's an interesting one to try to, like, really just dissect these tiny little social things that, you know.
But I do feel very
does get a bit complicated
if I'm not looking at someone while they're talking.
Yeah.
Most of the, you know, like 70 to 80% of the time while they're talking, I'll be looking at them and making eye contact so that they know I'm paying attention, and because I don't know, it makes me feel more connected and like really pick up on the nuance of what they're saying.
Yeah.
And that I guess is, completely opposite to my experience when I'm talking. So it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know
totally.
how much of it's like socialized and how much of it's just natural.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, the conversation I had with my psychiatrist as he was explaining, like, this stuff is natural. Like, it is. It's just, like, other people don't have to learn this. That's the thing that kind of blows my mind, is people are just walking around out there knowing what to do with their eyes. And there are other things that might, you know, make you uncomfortable giving eye contact if you're not a confident person, or if you have social anxiety, or if you have ADHD. All of those things can kind of create issues with eye contact.
Would you prefer it if I didn't look at you?
Nah, I'm not overthinking it too much. And also,
Cool.
I feel like I'm performing to the max right now. I'm on a podcast. Like, I am good. I am switched on.
You are. You're performing really well right now. Like, you have been on the ball. You're so fucking articulate. I feel like a fucking absolute soggy potato.
You're okay.
A soggy potato that's been left in the cupboard and sprouted eyes, and it's like so wrinkly.
No.
But like, I guess that's so, because I was going to ask you this question, like, okay, how about right now? Like, how much are you masking right now? Because obviously, like, you and I are pretty comfortable around each other, but like, can you let that drop, and what would that look like?
I think this is part of the problem that I have with, like, this whole masking, unmasking thing, is people are like, oh, just be comfortable, be yourself, which is great. Like, I would love to be myself. Like, okay, example, I'm wearing purple dots on my face. Like, I didn't put eyeshadow on my eyes, I put it on my cheeks because I like having purple dots on my face, and that's what I need today to make me happy. So that's like a tiny unmask.
Great.
But honestly, I think if I was doing full unmask right now, I wouldn't be on this podcast. I would probably be running around. I would be counting all the little things in the park, and I would be trying to climb trees, and I would probably be talking in a completely different voice, and I would be doing some imaginative play outside. So I don't actually feel like unmasking is conducive to the situation that you're in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it feels often like people are like, oh, just be comfortable. And I'm like, well, if I was being comfortable, I wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't be fucking talking to you right now. Yeah, so true.
Yeah, so it can be tricky. And before we close off the eye contact thing, I did want to make one point, because I've actually never voiced this before, but it just came to me while we were talking.
Sick.
If eye contact's really intense for you, which it is for me, and I feel like more intense for my partner James, like he almost never looks me in the eyes, and I really try to not look him in the eyes when I'm talking to him, because I feel like it freaks him out too much.
Oh, wow.
Which is a shame, because he has beautiful icy
Really
blue
nice
eyes. Oh my
yeah.
God, love. But sometimes I have to give him a break.
Give those people a break.
Give him a massive
I just
break.
want to swim around in those fucking little pools.
Tell me about it. Now, I know that for everyone, during sex and intimacy, eye contact can be intense, but I really feel like I have never had comfortable eye contact when I've had sex, and I don't really know how to do it. And I feel like if I do it, it'll last half a second, and it'll be like this really intense moment that I actually can't tell if I enjoy or not. What's your experience like with eye contact during sex? Because I know it's just such a mixed bag for everyone, and I think that's normal because it's so vulnerable.
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, that's such a good thing to bring up, because I remember the first time I came while looking into my partner's eyes.
Whoa!
And it was a big deal. I basically had to like force myself. I realized that I'd gotten better and better at having just eye contact in general while like being intimate. But as soon as I wanted to just actually go into the pleasure and lose myself and like be able to spill over into orgasm, I would have to close my eyes and kind of like tuck my head in the nook of their like shoulder or something, so they couldn't like see my face, and so we weren't looking at each other, and then that would allow me the sort of privacy or the space and allow me to be present enough to have an orgasm. And I noticed like, you know, that was happening, and I wanted to really challenge myself, because I'd also done a lot. I was doing heaps of like tantra stuff at the time. And there's like, you know, a lot of like eye gazing and transfiguration practices involved in that. So that had been kind of prepping me and getting me more used to eye contact in general, just quite vulnerable eye contact too. Like, you know, I did a fucking workshop where I literally had to sit across from a stranger and without speaking, just stare into their eyes for 40 minutes without talking. Do you know how fucking uncomfortable that is? Like even 1 minute with anyone, let alone a stranger, like the giggles come up, all the discomfort, all these different things. And then eventually, if you can kind of stick with it and practice it enough, you do manage to drop into a space that's quite insane and quite like almost psychedelic. And very, so I think like I'd had some practice with that, and then I really like loved and trusted my partner, and we were in this phase of me really challenging a lot of my fears and my inhibitions with sex. So it was like, cool, I want to fucking like, I want to make eye contact, and I want to be able to just like actually like come while we're looking into each other's eyes while we're having sex. And it was the most incredible thing ever.
That's crazy.
And then I could kind of do it after that. And then I was recommending, I was like, everyone needs to experience this. Guys, you should definitely fucking try to get comfortable. Like, it's going to take practice, but try to get comfortable with like looking into someone's eyes while you have sex in general, for the like added intimacy and vulnerability, which I like totally get off on. And then also like while you're coming. Because it's so fucking intense.
Yeah, I bet.
And so vulnerable.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's interesting, because I feel like those exercises, I mean, I haven't done as much as you. I haven't stared into someone's eyes for 40 minutes, probably just like 10 minutes max. Like that would have been a big workshop that you went to. I kind of find that so easy. Because one thing that I worry about with giving people eye contact is that I give too much eye contact.
Right.
And I don't know if you have ever seen someone like this. You know, when you're having a conversation with someone, they have crazy eyes. They're just like staring straight into your eyeballs and they like don't blink and they don't take any breaks.
Yeah, it's really intense.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I find that really easy. So it's almost like staring into someone's eyes for 10 minutes. I'm like, great. I don't have to think about looking away. I'm just going to stare. I can do that.
Yeah, fuck
You know?
yeah. So if it's, yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? Because that takes away the social processing for me. I'm happy to stare into someone's eyeballs.
What if they're also staring
That's
into
okay.
your eyeballs?
I don't mind.
And it's a social interaction and you're talking. And
I personally, I don't know. Like, I feel like that just doesn't happen. I feel like that just doesn't happen, really. I feel like, because once you add the social element to it, it's a different situation. You know what I mean?
Because sometimes I'm in a social situation. It happened just the other day. And I just feel pinned to the spot by their eyes. They're so intense and unwavering. And it's like, so I feel like a fucking deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
It's I just want to like run away from it. And it makes me really awkward. And I'm like, why is this so intense? Why is this person's eyes?
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, it's just because it's a little bit too
It's too much.
And
Yeah.
it feels unnerving.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, it totally does. Yeah.
Do you think that that's because they're autistic?
I mean, I can't say that everyone who has crazy eyes is autistic, but I think that a lot of people who I know who have crazy eyes are autistic and vice versa. People who I know who are autistic, they have crazy eyes. And I've been told before that I have like a stare like that, so I really try and make sure I look away every certain number of seconds in an appropriate place. I'm always like, where are people looking when they're taking breaks and looking away? I don't know, but I hope it's convincing. So there you go. The other thing along this, though, these are quite specific. I feel like some things that we can maybe mention that are maybe a bit more general is just in terms of like verbal and nonverbal communication. So the way that you express your emotions is quite different. And one way that I've really chosen my partners is I choose people who understand my joy, because I feel like I experience like a really bright joy, and a lot of people don't really always react to that in the way that I want them to. And it really feels like if you don't have a partner who understands your joy, then how are you supposed to have a life with that person? You know, how are you supposed to share an emotion with someone if they can't understand it?
Yeah, no, fuck.
So if you think about like on one far end of the spectrum, it might be like an autistic kid like hand flapping and screaming because they're so excited. I don't necessarily do that, but I definitely feel like when I express joy, it's often too much for people, which is, I don't know, I feel like it's sad.
So then,
I feel like it's sad.
With verbal and nonverbal communication, there's a lot of that goes on in the bedroom. How did you find your way to figuring that out?
Well, I had a lot of trouble with that, to be honest. And I kind of feel like if you spend so much time masking, you might actually not know how it feels good to be in your body and express yourself. So it's not even just a case of relaxing. It's a case of like finding out what feels good, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like if you don't even know how you like to express your emotions, or, you know, express like to sort of like quote unquote lose control, like physically, you can't really do it in the bedroom that easily. Or the alternative is, I think that a lot of people who are in, you know, various kink communities where there's this level of sort of abstraction from the normal world, where you get to be a little bit imaginative, where you get to go into a different space, that's really appealing if you're autistic, because you get to, I don't know, like have like a really obvious marker that you're not doing like the normal social thing anymore. That's not necessarily my experience. I'm not like into, you know, Perth's hottest furry dungeons. I don't know if those exist.
Dude, I saw it. There's a fairy over at the
Is there really?
Midsummer Rave over on the other side of the park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that kind of stuff is really appealing to people.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Everyone should listen to the episode I did interviewing a furry.
Yeah.
We did talk about that, neurodivergence and the intersection with like kink and, you know, being quite attracted to things like furryism,
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
cool.
then I also kind of feel like...
Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be, hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
This is like a message to anyone out there who's experienced this very specific thing, which I will say, if you do this, I feel like this is a big flag that you might have something going on. Differences in communication, verbal and nonverbal. Okay, one way that my husband and I communicate, when we both are kind of in a weird mood and we like don't really know, you know, what we should do next, or when we're kind of like having strong emotions, we have all of these like different sort of like sounds that we will do to each other. And a lot of them are just kind of like remembered from videos that we've seen, or like they're animals or different things. And we'll just do like a 20-second back and forth in this kind of like weird, like animal, like body language or way of communicating. And it's so funny because after we laugh, we're always like, damn, that was so weird. Like, why did we just have to pretend to be lizards on the couch for 10 seconds? But it kind of feels like we both know what the vibe is and we both get what's going on. And it feels really normal. But that's not how people talk to each other. So I feel like if you are someone who's done that in your relationships, I've almost always done that. I don't know what different examples are. Like one thing that we love to do is, okay, if you've ever had a hamster or like a mouse or a rat and they have that little like drip feeding thing in their cage where they have to like go up and go like, we'll like do that to each other at certain times and we both know what it means. We're both like, oh yeah, like that's that.
What does it mean?
It's kind of like, it's so hard to try and like vocalize this because we never do. It's kind of like, you're just a little mouse who's like drinking from the teat. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. It totally doesn't make sense. It would be in a situation where you feel sort of like small and vulnerable maybe. And rather than trying to communicate that as like a really big idea, you just kind of do a little bit of silly mouse body language and it gets the message across. And we have a lot of different things like that, like a lot. Like that's just one example. Like we must have like 30 of these different things that we know what they mean and we'll just, you know, like freeze frame and we'll break into this kind of like moment where we're just doing this weird form of communication that we both get, that we've kind of created in our relationship over time.
And does it sort of convey like what you need?
It conveys so much. It conveys everything. It helps us to connect to each other. It helps us to calm down. It helps us to connect to our emotions. It helps us to laugh. Because the other thing is like, we're not doing this 100% seriously, right? Like we're not actually believing that we're mice, although sometimes we're like, fuck. But then we'll always laugh at it. We'll like look back on it and be like, that was ridiculous. But I feel better and I get the vibe now. So if you've ever done that in your relationships, created these kind of like little fantasy characters that you can jump in at moments where, I don't know, you have a strong emotion or the time feels right.
You're not alone.
You're not alone. There's other people out there doing that. And that is a big example of differences in communication and a big example of what helps to be with a partner who's neurodivergent, because then you can do weird shit like that and it like fits and it makes sense and yeah.
Yeah, I guess like, you know, it's sort of like, you know, how couples will have like inside jokes or little
code
words or throwbacks that, you know, but it's a little bit more nuanced maybe and like probably serves more of a purpose in terms of communicating vibes and needs as opposed to just like purely being for a lol or something.
Exactly, yeah.
And, like, all of those, like, in jokes, it's all bids for connection.
It
and
is.
to, like, get on the same page with someone. So it makes a lot of sense. Like, I love that. I think every couple has certain things like that, but yeah, it sounds like you just have more of them, and they're more
like physical, like they
Yeah.
feel like these physical, like it actually feels like when James crawls onto the edge of the couch and pretends to be like a really gross lizard, I'm like, I know exactly how you feel right now.
I love that. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
I want to do that more. Just embody, like, whatever I'm...
Yeah, or like here's a fucking perfect example that I feel like will be more understandable and relatable. When we're feeling really exhausted from the day and we're just like, fuck, I'm done with the day, rather than saying that, we will just act as if we're like a really bloated, rotten, like, fish or frog. Like, if you ever had a pool and you like found a frog in the bottom of your pool and it's all bloated and its guts are like starting to get squished out of its mouth and it looks disgusting, we'll like act like that. And
How do you
and
act
it's
like that?
like actually you just act like that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And James does it so well.
Oh my god, I want to see it so bad.
So yeah.
I love that.
That's an example.
Yeah, I love that, dude. Yes. All right, cool. On to the next one.
On to the next one, which honestly I think this is... Okay. Yeah, this one I think is pretty cut and dry. Deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. On the lower end of the spectrum, you could be like me, where you just have no idea who's your friend, how to be friends, but you're really good at like surface level impressing people, but maybe deep inside your heart you don't actually feel or know when someone likes you. Okay? Or on the other end of the spectrum, something that I was reading on Reddit recently, which I thought was really interesting, is just about how incel culture targets autistic men.
Wow.
Which I've kind of always thought, but then I was reading it on here and I was like, oh, I'm so happy someone else who knows more than me is actually talking about this.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, incel is like, okay, you want to connect with people, you want to have sex, but you can't. Why? Because people don't like you. Maybe it's because you're super socially different to everyone and, you know, you're autistic. And I feel like people who are autistic already feel so disconnected from the world. Something like that kind of speaks to those people is like speaking to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the intersection with like gaming as well.
Yeah.
Like it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
And I think that what can be really hard about this, if you are autistic, of, you know, like difficulty maintaining relationships or making friends or whatever, if you think about being like a 1% autistic person in a 99% not autistic world, chances are like most people are not going to understand you and they're not going to be able to relate to you. And so this is one where I really feel like the word differences in, you know, maintaining or making relationships feels like it fits more for me, because it's like, I can do it. It's just when people have a vastly different experience to me, it's super hard to do it. Yeah. And the other thing that I always think is like, well, why aren't people trying to connect with me more? You know? Because when you are different to everyone, you put in so much work trying to connect with everyone and trying to work everything out. And no one's really reaching into your bubble.
Yeah.
You know?
It's sad. And I wonder if just from such a young age you have, I guess it's that like tendency to do most of the labor to socially connect has come from an early age, when you had to do that in order to secure your sort of survival and safety, you know, with your primary caregivers and then with your friends, and we're hardwired to try to, you know, belong and sort of not get kicked out of the tribe and not be ostracized. And so I guess it just is an instinctive, almost like evolutionary thing that autistic people do, like high masking in particular, do make that effort to socially assimilate, because we're hardwired to try to do that so that we don't get ostracized and die. Whereas people who are just like neurotypical, did we have a better term for that?
No, that's the word.
Have not really had to try so hard at that, because they sort of have always just found it easier to fit in and belong and like do the organic socializing stuff.
Yeah.
And so we don't necessarily even think to try to reach into other people's bubbles if they feel, because also like I guess, you know, at least for me, if I notice someone's acting a bit different in a social context and I'm not getting the regular cues,
Yeah.
I would probably assume they don't want me to talk to them.
Yeah,
Or they're
of
shy,
course.
or they're anxious, or they just don't actually, you know, so then
Because those are the cues you're getting, right? And that's what that
Yeah.
usually means.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like, you know, we might think we're being kind of considerate and just leaving someone be.
Yeah.
Because if I was acting like that, that would indicate that I didn't want anyone to approach me and try to reach into my fucking bubble.
Yeah.
But like, yeah,
Totally.
I suppose. So there's just, I guess, yeah, it's miscommunication. We're speaking different languages.
Yeah, exactly.
verbally
It's a
and non-verbally.
miscommunication. And this might be like a good time that we can actually talk about this, because I've always had trouble with this. And I don't know if you can say anything that will make this more clear to me. So like on the criteria there, it's like differences or deficits in maintaining relationships, and also understanding relationships. And one of the things that I really have trouble understanding, when you and I talk, what do we talk about, and what do you want me to say? Because I often feel like when I talk to you, I don't know. Like, for you, it feels so effortless. You'll just bring up a story. You'll just tell me something. For me, I'm always like, what do I say next? Or like, I don't know. What do you want? Like, when we have a conversation, what is it usually that you're going for? And I'm not saying I don't get this at all, but I'm saying I want to hear from your point of view.
Friends?
Yeah. Like when
It's
you
like-
and I, like what are we doing when we're chatting?
Yeah.
Like, how do
Well-
you know what to say?
Firstly, it's kind of heartbreaking to hear that there's this sort of, and we've talked about this before, and we've actively tried to sort of nut it out.
Yeah, we have.
Because I don't want it to feel like we're ships passing in the night, and like, and I especially don't want it to feel like I'm getting, you know, what I think feels pretty, you know, normal out of the interaction, and you're kind of just having this completely other experience, being like, fuck, am I, you know, and also it's really hard to answer that, because I don't go into social interactions, especially with like existing sort of friends where the rapport and the trust is built, thinking about what I want
With like
from
a
that
goal.
interaction.
You're just doing it.
I'm just doing it, and
Yeah, okay.
I guess to try to make it a bit more like tangible, there would be different things for different situations and contexts. So for instance, if I am like, wah, my life's hard, this thing's happening, fucking whatever, I am probably just telling you to keep you up to date with what's going on for me, so you're aware of where I'm at and why I might, you know, my energy or whatever might be a certain way. I'm sort of having a bit of a vent, because it feels like it lightens the load a little bit sometimes to tell someone else and have that kind of like shared understanding that like I'm having a tough time right now, and probably just like, you know, you to be like, fuck dude, that fucking sucks, like just you know, like people are often talking about how it's probably more, especially for women, we probably prefer to just feel heard and have our experiences and feelings validated and acknowledged without too much like, right, let's go into fix-it mode, let's find a solution to your problem. If you're coming to me and having a whinge about your life, that's an indication that you need a solution, and I think that's really hard not to go into that. I do it as well, where like I'll go into like fix-it mode, and sometimes I have to just sort of really consciously try not to do that straight away, and like maybe ask people like, do you want some advice or a solution right now, or some suggestions or some thoughts or feedback, or do you just want me to listen, and do you just want to have a vent? And like, I think that is more normalized nowadays as well, is like actually just asking people, what do you need from me right now? I'm hearing you, that sounds really tough, what do you need from me right now? So I think like you can just ask people that, and you can totally do that with me as well. And then if it's like, you know, a context where I'm just like, okay, so like this stuff's been going on, and like I'm telling a story or something's funny or whatever, like, I guess like I'm just trying to again, like fill you in on what's going on for me. And
Yeah.
usually what would occur then is like maybe, you know, you'd chime in with like a story of your own, or like something that made you think of, or
Okay.
like something relevant.
Like the conversation kind of naturally just builds on that.
Yeah, it just meanders around. I don't, you know, usually have like a set goal or direction I want to go in. It's more just like I'm just chatting about stuff. And then if you're like, oh, that makes me think of this thing, or oh, I had a similar experience, or like, oh, wow, that's interesting. I've got a completely different take on how I would find that, or whatever the fuck. But like literally just adding in what it makes you think of.
Yeah.
And then we bounce back and forth.
Do you think I do that or not? I'm curious to know, like when you tell me something, like a random, something that's happened or whatever.
I don't know.
Okay, well now...
I think you do a bit.
Okay.
It depends, but it's also like it depends on your energy levels and where we are
Totally.
and how regulated you feel.
Yeah.
And how much juice you've got in the tank for fucking conversing.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I think like what you've sort of expressed in the past is that, one, it's helpful for you to be doing something with your hands.
Yeah.
And like doing something crafty or whatever while we're like talking, so that you can be more present with the conversation. Whereas I have the opposite. I need to be a little bit more minimal with what I'm doing so that I can concentrate on the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not good at multitasking, whereas multitasking almost sort of helps you be more present. And something that you've talked about, which I'm like, oh, I actually totally rate that, and we should do more. We should carve out time to do that, which I suppose is sort of what we're doing right now, is like rather than just having unstructured social interactions and conversations that just meander around and aren't necessarily about anything in particular, because that feels a bit draining and boring for you, picking a fucking topic and going really deep into it and like having a discussion.
Yeah.
And if we're doing that, then all I'm expecting is just for you to fucking tell me all of your incredibly insightful thoughts and interesting reflections that you're having on that topic, because I find that really fascinating, and then we sort of end up just bouncing off each other that way.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting to like. I think you've nailed it there with like talking about a topic rather than kind of chatting, because that's something that I kind of struggle with. I feel like it's really easy for me to talk about something, and when I'm just kind of talking with someone about, you know, like I'm so mystified when I'm in a group setting or I'm talking to someone and they just kind of like tell a story. I'm like, how did you were sitting there in your mind, how did you select that story and decide that that's what you're going to say? For me, it feels like, for example, I went and hung out with like a neurodivergent friend recently, and I sat down in his living room, and literally within 2 minutes, we were having an in-depth discussion about like how artists kind of break down images into different shapes, and like how you can kind of do the same if you're a musician, breaking down like a song into like different individual tones, and like how you can use that to write music. And I was like so comfortable, so easy. And then I'll be sitting kind of like in a more chatty situation, and I'm like, I don't even know what would be the right story to tell right now. Like, I don't even know what the right thing to say is right now.
I fucking get it. I feel exactly the same, like a lot of the time. I'll literally be sitting there just searching, like racking my brains for a conversation topic or a question or anything, and I can't come up with anything, and half the time I don't give a fuck. I don't even want to ask a question because I'm not interested enough to like, and I think I've attributed that to being quite introverted, and just not having a very full social battery at times will mean that I don't have a lot to give, and I don't care enough about anything to ask someone a question and engage in a conversation. But sometimes I feel a lot of pressure to.
Yeah.
So in those situations, I'm like, fuck, okay, like no one said anything for a second. I'm expected to make conversation and say something here. What could I possibly say? What am I possibly interested about this person? And I know people that are just so genuinely curious about people in the world that it's so effortless for them to come up with just questions. Sometimes if it's like usually with stories and stuff, if it's like happened to me recently, or I've just come out of an experience where I've rocked up somewhere, I'm like, oh guys, like this thing happened, then that'll be easy. But like, yeah, honestly, like I'm not amazing at this all the time either. Sometimes I'm fucking on, and sometimes I'm not. And then also sometimes I'm conversing with someone who's fucking great at it, and we have compatibility and it's flowy.
Yeah.
And sometimes not at all. And then sometimes I feel like, fucking completely handicapped.
Yeah.
Like, socially. And I'm often like, but is that because I'm being really fucking weird and awkward right now? Or is it because the other person's being weird and awkward? Or is it because we're both just struggling to meet in the middle because of a combination of neurodivergence and introversion versus extroversion and fucking trauma and just, like, you know?
Yeah.
There's so much to it. So,
There's
like,
a lot going on, yeah.
I'm not surprised that it's, like, a lot for you to try to navigate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like when I talk to some of my autistic friends, it's so funny the way the conversation flows. Like, some of the first things we'll say to each other will be like, hi, how much time we have to talk, what mood we're in, and then we'll be like, should you talk first or should I talk first? And when we say everything so bluntly like that, I'm like, oh, okay, all right, easy.
Yep.
And then it's like, should you talk first or should I talk first? And one of us will, go, and it'll just be like a monologue on like a topic. And I find that so much easier.
Sick, dude. I mean, feel free to do that with me. Like, I'm so down with that. I mean, I often wouldn't know what fucking topic to choose. It might be more likely that I would just be filling you in on what's been going on for me. But I'm so down if you just choose topics. Especially if there's a lot of intersection in, like, what we find interesting.
Yeah.
Like, we can just have a discussion about something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really down for that.
Yeah, cool. Okay, should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go. So that's all the social stuff. This stuff is more like, I guess, more like personal behavioral stuff. So it's like the broad category is defined as restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. Okay.
Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab, and the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster, and it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify, or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words, because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
First thing is stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. So this is like essentially autistic stimming.
Yeah.
I didn't really think I stimmed until I worked out what stimming was, and I was like, oh, I do this shit all the time.
Yeah.
And now something I've been kind of struggling with is, being aware that I'm stimming. When I'm aware that I'm stimming now, I don't stop myself. I used to kind of just subconsciously stop myself because I know it's an abnormal behavior. But when you're stimming in public, often I've been like, I don't actually know if I want to do this because I'm outing myself as like...
But a lot of your stimming, most people wouldn't even recognize as stimming.
No, a lot of them wouldn't, and that's because a lot of my stims are kind of, more subdued. But if I'm kind of going for a walk by myself and I'm really in my zone, I sometimes like to do like kind of big hand movements, like kind of put my arms out in like a cactus pose and kind of just shake my hands. Imagine if you walked past someone on a path and they were just doing that, and you could see them coming for like 50 meters and you crossed and they were still doing it. And I often, when I'm doing that, I think like, this person clearly is looking at me and they know something's like quote unquote wrong with me. You know what I mean? Like, you're outing yourself as like a weirdo. That's how it feels.
Totally.
So it's kind of a tricky one. And also, you were asking me earlier about what echolalia is. And that's when you kind of like repeat sounds that you hear. So like, for example, if you like heard a bird sound, it feels really natural if you're autistic to just repeat a sound that you just heard, just because that's what your brain does naturally.
Wow.
And so I feel like
And it's like a self-regulating tool, hey? Like stimming kind of helps soothe your nervous system?
Yeah, exactly. So you can up-regulate or you can down-regulate. It's kind of like getting what's on the inside out. So if you're really stressed, your stim might be like really vigorous.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're feeling really relaxed and you kind of want to calm down, like you might sort of like put your finger in the air and just kind of trace like abstract lines with your finger. Like I really like to do that while listening to music, like just kind of trace my finger around in the air because it makes me feel like kind of, I don't know, happy.
I honestly think like people need to do all of that way more. Like even if you're not neurodivergent,
I so agree.
So fucking buttoned up and we're so composed and we don't want to look silly and we refrain from doing so many things that if we were truly embodied and we weren't worried about what other people were thinking, I think most people
more people would be doing it.
More of that kind of stuff.
I think more people would be doing it, absolutely, because regardless of if you're neurodivergent, if you do something really vigorous with your body, it has an impact on you, right? Like if you do vigorous exercise, or if you suddenly jumped out of your chair right now and just did like 10 really intense burpees, like how would you feel after that, right? So like all movement has an impact on you. Or if you did like a forward fold for 5 minutes, how would you feel after that?
Yeah.
And I think this is one reason I've been really drawn to teaching yoga, because for me that world is so alive. So it feels really easy to connect with it and work out like what I'm trying to achieve in terms of like helping people calm down or get energized, and package it into a yoga class that is like more digestible for people than kind of like, you know, shaking your hands in the kitchen when you don't know what food to make, which I do all the time.
Oh, sick.
Okay, moving along from that one. Insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Okay, so I used to be like, I'm not autistic, I don't have routines. Routines can be like hidden. Like you can have hidden kind of like ways that you always just do something that you don't realize is a routine. But it is because there's this sort of internal insistence that things have to be done in that way.
And if you skip doing it or you do something different, you feel quite on edge.
You feel super off. Yeah, like you just, because think about it this way, like if you did something every single day for 10 years and then you didn't do it, it would fuck you up. It would fuck you up, right? And it's, I think, because in your mind you hinge so much importance on like doing things a certain way.
But what are some examples of like little routines that you had that were hidden?
I think one of the most obvious ones was that like I have a smoothie for breakfast every morning. I kind of need to do that. Like I need to have a smoothie for breakfast. Sometimes I'll go out for breakfast. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm going to skip my smoothie and go out for brunch and like have a big breakfast. No, it feels so bad inside my stomach to have not liquid food in my stomach in the morning. And I think partly I'm just used to that. But also partly like I just can't wrap my head around the idea of not eating a smoothie for breakfast. Another kind of hidden one would be the way that I go to sleep. So when I go to sleep, I turn on my left side, I get my spine into a really nice alignment, I support my knee with a pillow, I lay on the side every single time without fail. When I'm ready to actually sleep, so maybe like 2 minutes later because I fall asleep fast, I turn onto my back, I arrange my shoulder blades underneath me in like a really nice shavasana pose, and like I arrange my neck and I make sure that my lower back's not arching too much, and then I sleep. And I do that literally every single night.
Whoa!
Because like that's the most comfortable position for my body, and I think because I'm a yoga teacher, I'm like, anatomically this is the best breast position.
Wow.
So that's how I fall asleep every night. But I wouldn't have thought that was a routine, right? I would have thought, oh, I just like to sleep on my back. But once I became aware that, you know, routines can be embedded in like sort of actions, I'm like, oh yeah, I do that every single night when I go to sleep.
Wow. That's a hilarious way to fall asleep, by the way. I can't fall asleep on my back, pretty much. Like, it feels so exposed and not.
It doesn't. Everyone's different.
Yeah.
Everyone's different, right? But one thing that I will say, like, let's relate it back now to sex, because we haven't talked about that in a while. I feel.
Love your work.
Really, like, it can feel really overwhelming for me, or like very stimulating when I have sex not in bed. Now, I'm not saying I'm just a prude who wants to have sex in the exact same way, exact same place all the time. But, like, there's got to be a really good fucking reason for me to not have sex in bed. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like if you are someone who has more restricted thinking, you might have ways that you need to kind of get in the mood and get in the zone. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do those things, you're just not in the mood and you're not in the zone, right?
Totally.
And I think it's another example of how these things can kind of help everyone. You need to kind of set the tone for yourself. You know what I mean? Everyone could benefit from a little bit more like tone setting around sexual interaction so that they feel sort of safe and like they can
100%,
chill out and
100%, especially
feel better.
when, like, you know, our desire levels, our arousal is so context dependent.
Yeah.
And if you're being intentional about setting the scene and creating a conducive context for relaxation, for getting into the zone, then you're going to be so much more capable of tapping into, you know, states of arousal and pleasure and presence. And if you don't, then, like, it's no wonder so many people struggle to come or have, you know, or orgasm with a partner or whatever, because there's a lot of unpredictability in that, and also not a lot of consistency or intention around getting the context right so that you can fully relax, fully be present, fully get in the zone, you know, like, so I totally feel you.
Yeah. And I think it's just important to maintain a bit of a balance there, because I mean, obviously it's good to get in the zone, but part of what can be challenging about having really regimented thinking is that, like, you can't only be okay if things are a certain way, right? Like, you have to be able to
adapt,
right? Like, you just have to.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it takes a lot to make me want to have sex on anything other than a comfy bed, though.
Yeah.
Or, like, you know, a comfy couch or something comfortable. Like, I'm all about the comfort and, like, softness, and like, it just does not appeal to me to be, you know, pushed up against a tree or, like, on, like, the ground where, like, there's sticks and rocks digging into my skin, or on a cold, like, medicinal, clinical kind of, like, table, or, like, I need, like, softness and comfort.
Good vibes.
Yeah,
totally.
Warmth.
Yeah. Following along on that sensory input thing, the second last point is hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input. So it's either like your sensory inputs are too strong or not strong enough. And I feel like, let's just pick up right there. If you have differences in how you process senses, the sexual landscape is going to be, like, crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's either going to be, like, really, really, really overwhelming, or you might be someone who's, like, doing some really extreme sensory seeking during sex because that's what your nervous system wants. So if you think of people who do, like, really extreme, like, sensory seeking in, like, the kink scene, when I see that, I'm like, oh, that's, you know, like, a lot of people might see something like that and go, like, I don't want a bruise. But, like, if you want an extreme sensory input, then that kind of kink scene, I feel like, is perfect.
It really delivers,
It really delivers.
So that's if you're maybe, like, hyposensitive, so you need more intensity?
Yeah, so I mean, like, the way that, like, this is kind of assessed is, like, all the senses are different. Like, you might be sensory seeking for smells, but not sensory seeking for touch, and everyone's different. And even if you're not neurodivergent, you know, you might prefer to, you know, have a certain sense stimulated than the other. But yeah, the idea is that, like, some people are really sensory seeking. So, like, if you even if you are really sensitive, to be honest. So, for example, my sense of touch is, like, very oversensitive. Like, one of my least favorite things is when my partner, like, puts his hand on my arm and he just kind of gently strokes it. I hate that, because it's almost like it feels like sandpaper. It feels like he's sandpapering my arm with his fingerprints.
Whoa!
I hate that.
Do you know, so this might not be relate to your experience, but a lot of people with sensory sensitivities, if they struggle with that very, very light, like, feather-light touch and stroking, there's sometimes a bit of an inherent aversion to that, because it feels like when there's an insect crawling on you.
Oh.
And so so we're like automatically want to brush it away, and it's like having ants crawling on you or something, walking over and sort of tweaking your little body hairs and stuff, and just having to not brush it away, like, you know, that feeling of like hyper awareness of this like really, and it's like objectively that shouldn't be an unpleasant sensation. It's just a little thing crawling on you. It's not a big sensation, but I've tried to sit there and just endure it, and I fucking can't.
It's hard.
When
it's so hard. It's so hard. Yeah.
But I like it with humans, because also people. We do have like receptors that are purely to pick up slow, like sensual, soft touch, and so a lot of people find that very pleasurable and relaxing. And then I suppose, if you've got sensitivities, that can be like the worst thing ever. Yeah,
totally. Wow. But if you kind of take that on the flip side, because I have touch sensory sensitivities, I actually really like when my partner really gently touches my stomach, because I spend so much time protecting my stomach, making sure it doesn't hurt, making sure I don't feel nauseous, just making it safe, because my stomach is like on a knife's edge of like just being in a total crisis. So in the right circumstance, when he does lightly touch my stomach, because I never allow it, and I never allow that kind of touch on my skin, it's amazing. So it's kind of like, because it's so intense, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. And translated to the sex world, it's like, it just, because sex is like, you know, so much more sensory stuff going on, it can either be like a total nightmare or it can be amazing. And I feel like you just kind of have to work out what works for you.
Yeah. I mean, you should definitely listen to the episode I did with Kiki Marie about the disgust response, because we talked a lot about like sensory sensitivities, and, you know, her partner is neurodivergent and has like a lot of sensory sensitivities, and she has some different ones, and they've had to navigate that. And we kind of talked a lot about this, which is so fascinating. But when you're talking about the touch on your stomach, like, I really resonate with areas that are usually very like vulnerable, or like no-go zones that you don't really ever let anyone touch, you don't get touched very often, they don't get a lot of attention or airtime. They can be like the gold spots, because like if you do trust someone enough and feel relaxed and safe enough to allow touch there, that sends the signal to your nervous system that like you must be really fucking relaxed and safe.
Yeah, totally.
And so there's something like deeply soothing about it. Yeah. And like abdominal touch, like I often find that's when I'm doing body work, that's when people will start to fall asleep or feel like they just drop down a deeper level of relaxation.
Oh, that's interesting.
And also the internal yoni work, because it's such a rare experience where you are being touched internally like that, with such sort of intention and care and like gentleness. And if they feel relaxed enough and safe enough to allow a stranger to put their finger inside their body, then they must be really fucking safe.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, then the connection to like the vagus nerve and the nervous system via that and stuff. So I find that those areas that, you know, in different contexts would be like, fuck no, in the right context, if you feel safe and comfortable, are like delicious.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah, there's definitely something about that for sure. If you are someone who like has sensory sensitivities, I think a kind of cool thing to try to see if you find it helpful is, I don't know if you've ever had this, to have someone lie on top of you and just get squished. Do you do that?
Yeah.
Love that shit.
Yeah, I mean the weighted blanket.
Weighted blankets.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as much of a fan of that. I almost feel a little bit stifled and trapped. I like a little bit of body weight here and there, but like honestly, if it's preventing me from like taking a full inhale, or if I feel a little bit pinned, no.
Yeah, okay.
I like being on top.
That's so fair enough.
Yeah.
So fair enough. Like, one thing I'm really looking forward to about going home, I'm just going to get James to kind of squish me. And, like, I kind of can't properly breathe, but, like, he gets off after 20 seconds, so it's fine.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, I get why that would make people feel safe and, like, soothed and held and stuff. Like, I interviewed someone at the sex party who has a play partner that likes mummification.
Whoa.
Yeah, and the whole kind of thing with that is like compression. So they use like this sort of like slightly stretchy sports tape, and they like compress like every single part of their body. And then they just kind of lie there. Like, I know, but imagine if you trust someone so much.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And you can just completely surrender, and then every part of you is held in tight and compressed. Yeah. That's like euphoric bliss for them.
Yeah.
yeah, like it was really cool interviewing that person and hearing about that sort of thing, because like it's just, you know, it's a kink that I hadn't really even heard of, and I don't personally think I would experience it in that way, but like I get it. I totally get why that's appealing.
Yeah.
And
It's kind of like a super extreme version of what you were saying about like the stomach, because it's like a vulnerable area and feeling safe.
Yeah.
So it's like, getting mummified, it's like it's pretty vulnerable. So if you can do it, it feels pretty good. I imagine it's just like an extension of that idea, right?
And like, entering subspace.
Yeah.
You know, like being, I would assume that person has an inclination towards being the submissive partner. And so that is just like a really intense way to be submissive and surrender. And I don't want to try like all these things once, but like I kind of can't be bothered.
I mean, buying enough sports tape to cover your entire body, that would be expensive.
Also, I think it takes a bit of investment in like finding a play partner who you feel safe and comfortable with, and you've got a dynamic
100%,
with. 100%,
yeah.
You know, like I just think like this is a lifestyle that you can't just like dip in and out of effortlessly. Like it's quite an investment of like, you know, social effort and connection building and networking, and then, you know, buying whatever gear you need, and then carving out the time, and probably like having a lot of conversations and practice. Yeah, because like I'd love to fucking try some. I want to be like shibari, like tied up and suspended. I think
you could be shibari'd. You could do that if you wanted to.
I think you still have to like, you know, I can.
That would be like
someone to fucking
low.
do
Yeah,
it,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, also seeps though. Like if I had someone that I was hanging out with regularly that just did that and was like a rigger, I'd be like, fuck yeah. In fact, anyone that's listening to this podcast, if you're an experienced shibari rigger, I've never been tied up and experienced that, and I'm kind of curious about it. So
hell yeah, I would love to see that for you. I would love to see that for you.
Cool. All right, what else we got?
Well, this is the last one, which is highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is pretty much just like if you're autistic, you got special interests.
Oh, yeah. So you
and
go super deep into the special interests.
You go super deep into your special interests, and when you do that, it just opens up this world that you... I don't know, like it's this whole world that you're so free in and you're so happy in, and it's really awesome. But I think what can be challenging is when you are autistic, it's tricky to function outside of that world, because if you're completely immersed in something, it's like you don't have to think about what's next. If you're not immersed in something,
unpredictable, uncontrolled,
and also like you have to be, you know, you're back in the zone of like masking and thinking and planning things out and working and calculating and all of that.
Yeah,
so
navigating.
Yeah, exactly. It's so easy for me to inhabit like an abstract space that I'm interested in. And I feel like a lot of my relationships with other autistic people is, rather than kind of having just like a casual social back and forth, we'll like get an idea and we'll cut it open and we'll have a conversation where we're essentially just exploring it intellectually together.
Yeah.
And that feels really, really easy. And I think that also, you know, the idea of the abnormal intensity or like fixation on like a certain topic, I feel like this, you can really easily see how this kind of manifests in terms of like sex and relationships. Going back to the kink thing, you have to dedicate so much time to learning things like that. And if for you, learning about that and thinking about that and doing that is just this like total free space where you're just like in heaven, it's easy to dedicate hours and hours and hours a day to doing something and learning something.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order.
You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later.
Yeah, dude, like, imagine just making sex your special interest.
Yeah, totally. And there are people who have.
Yeah.
Like, I was talking to one of my friends recently about this guy that they met who has sex as a special interest. So he fucking loves talking about it all the time, loves learning about it. And I mean, you know, clearly, I feel like this is one of the reasons that you and I kind of like hang out so easily is because both of us are interested in this. So we can like easily talk about it and talk about relationships and sex and all the rest of that stuff. But I think the idea of having something as a special interest is, I guess a good way of thinking about it is that information feels relaxing. So like if you are autistic and you have a certain special interest, learning information and studying information and communicating information about that thing feels extremely relaxing. Like it's like the way that your brain switches off. So like one of my favorite things to do would be to like put on like a heavy duty like biology podcast and just be like, fuck yeah. Science.
Dude, I wish I had more of that. That's actually one very useful.
It is super useful.
Skill that's a bit of an asset in this society.
Yeah.
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 So can you choose your special interest, or
No.
it's kind of just what's interesting you at the time?
Well, it's you. I mean, you do choose them, right? But this is where, you know, your personality might come into it. So your personality is going to impact what you're interested in. Like I can't go, okay, my next interest is going to be X thing because that's going to make me money. Like it's not like I can consciously choose to focus on something. It's like my brain's going to be more geared towards certain topics.
That makes sense.
You know? But if you look at people out there, if you think about someone who is really eccentric and really successful and really obsessive about their work, I really feel like eccentric and obsessive, that almost for me is like a no-brainer. Okay, that person's probably autistic.
I mean, yeah, and look
you
at
know?
fucking Elon Musk.
Exactly.
The most autistic person out, and he turned his special interest into like $1 billion.
100%. 100%. Yeah, Elon Musk is a great example. Yeah. And he kind of has that like, you know, sociopath, psychopath thing going on. He's essentially like a giant child who's just, oh yeah, he is a robot. He is like a robot, but he's kind of like a giant child who's just got so much money and the world is his playground. Like he can do whatever he wants and he can be crazy. But some of this intensive kind of obsessive energy, what I will say, something that I've struggled with in the past is channeling all of that onto one person. I think that I know a lot of other neurodivergent people who kind of struggle with that. Like if you tend to get fixated on things, you can easily become really fixated or obsessed with a person. And I don't think that that's a good thing all the time.
Like when you're crushing on them, or just in general if you admire someone? Or?
It could be either. It could be someone that you're in a relationship with, or it could be someone that you don't know at all, but you just feel so completely consumed by that, like, I don't know.
Like a celebrity or something.
Could be a celebrity, yeah, or someone that you kind of vaguely know. Like I studied engineering with this guy, and we did like a group project together, and that was pretty much it. But I was like, the amount of brain space that I dedicated to thinking about him and like channeling like amorous emotions towards him was intense. Like I actually feel like I was like in love with him without even knowing him. And I don't think that that's healthy for anyone.
Yeah, well, fixation is quite extreme and
Yeah.
not really generally a sign of like a healthy mental state
Yeah.
towards anything. Like, I mean, balance, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, fixation and obsession can be so all-consuming. That's really interesting. I didn't know that happens so much with people, but I guess it makes sense because the special interest thing, the hyperfixation thing.
Yeah.
Okay, crazy. So, well, not crazy, but fucking sick. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's so wild how some of this I just relate to so much, and then some of it I'm like, whoa, imagine if that was my experience moving around in this world. Like, fucking hell. Like, some of it feels like such an asset that would help you function in the world, and then some of it like such a like, I guess a bit of a disadvantage or a handicap, or I guess just more of a challenge when you're trying to kind of function in the current social norms and systems and stuff. Is there anything you kind of feel like we haven't spoken about that about anything, but also like if there was something to kind of highlight how this has tied into your intimacy, your sex life, your relationship, and like maybe even some like tips for people? Like
I think that it's really important to work on creating relationships where you feel like you don't have to act, and where you feel safe enough to like practice not acting. Because here's the thing, like you can't just unmask and okay, all your problems are solved. You need to practice that shit, and then you need to also be in the presence of people who are not going to run away or misunderstand you when you do unmask. So I think it's honestly like there's no easy answer. You need to do a bunch of work, you need to do a bunch of practice. You also need to like talk to people about this, which is so hard because usually people like don't know what to say or they don't want to hear it. But it's very helpful to spend time practicing and also just feeling like you can be you, even if that's going to be really weird or silly, because you'll be happier in the end.
Fuck yeah. Like, so this might be leading into the ADHD, which I think we'll do a part 2 about. But like, I remember you sort of saying that because we first met years ago when you hired me as a sex coach, and we were working on stuff together around your intimate life, and like you've said to me a few times, like some of the home play practices and the strategies and tools that I gave you made such a big difference because they like helped you channel that focus in like an embodied way, and you directed like the energy and the focus into the actual experience, which then and that turned the whole kind of hyper focus, like sensory sensitivity, blah blah blah, into like a real asset.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's do the sensory sensitivity first, because I feel like that's easier. If you have sensory sensitivity, what you have to do is work out like what you need for sensory safety. So like maybe you need to be a certain temperature, maybe you need to like be sitting on something that's the correct texture. Like if I am sitting on, like for example, we have a leather couch at the moment, nightmare. I would never have sex on a leather couch. I can barely sit on a leather couch because it feels too scary. So you need to work out what you need for sensory safety, and once you've worked that out, you can kind of explore. I think you should explore different sensations. You don't have to like do something that's going to give you a bruise. Explore like heavy touch, light touch, like what do you like, and see what you can find, because chances are if you have sensory sensitivity, there's going to be something that you can do. Maybe it's not a really extreme sex act, but that for you is going to be like very awakening to your body. You know what I mean? In terms of what the other thing that you were saying was channeling that kind of intensity and focus, I think that that's absolutely true in terms of like if you are someone who's maybe more obsessive or you have different fixations, if you can learn to channel that into a physical experience, you will have an amazing and powerful time. Because if you're autistic, your brain has more neural connections and there's less neural pruning, which means that the kind of pathways in there are more elaborate. There's just more connections in your brain. And if you can use that for sex, you're going to have a sick time. And if you are disembodied during sex, then all of those maze-like pathways are just going to be like a distraction and you're going to kind of panic and freak out. So what I kind of realized is, because I'm really interested in yoga, what I love to do is super tune into like yoga and really do some really specific like micro adjustments of my posture and my breathing and all of that. And that helps me to get into this really consciously created like physical space. And one of the things that you said to me, Freya, when we were working together was, I don't even know what it was. It wasn't this massive breakthrough thing, but you had mentioned, like yogic breathing or like yoga, And I was like, holy shit, when you have sex, it's essentially what you're trying to do is the same thing that you're trying to do in yoga. You're getting in touch with your body. You're paying attention to the sensation. And you're using that to kind of like go even deeper. And, all of us walk around in our heads, like thinking all day, and it can be really challenging to get into that space. But if you can sort of channel all of your brain power and your intensity to paying attention to what's going on in your body, then you will have so much more access to all the good things that are there. Hopefully you're having good sex and it will feel good when you turn into it. So, that's half the struggle. But yeah, if you have that sort of intense mind that loves to cut open ideas and focus on things, there's a shit ton of stuff happening in here that you can focus on if you learn how to kind of like channel your breath and use your body for good.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, fuck yeah, totally agree. And it was so cool hearing you reflect on, the coaching experience and the home play practices and how you managed to use those and find a lot of value in them, because I didn't really know much about neurodivergence when we were working together and you hadn't had any of your diagnoses yet. So I wasn't giving those exercises as a specific strategy for someone who's neurodivergent. They were just ones that I would give anyone anyway in your situation, and they apply, they work for pretty much everyone, because it's embodiment stuff. It's somatic stuff. It's presence. It's interoception, so it was interesting because I was like, oh wow, I didn't even intentionally mean to, but it managed to actually work really well with your neurodivergence.
Totally.
Which was cool to know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, fuck yeah. Well, I feel like this is a huge chonky epi, so let's just chonky epi is what I meant to say. Let's wrap it up here, and we can maybe do an ADHD one to follow on. If you haven't listened to the initial episode we did, that's a Tub Talks installment where we were in the tub having a bit of a soak while talking about neurodivergence. We cover a bit of stuff that we don't touch upon here that's just as interesting. So if you're into this kind of content, definitely go back and listen to that one as well. But yeah, any final thoughts?
No, I feel like it's a lot of thoughts.
That was a lot of thoughts. A lot of good thoughts.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraff_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraff.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.